Buying a house in 2026 is not a mistake. Buying one for the wrong reason is. And that distinction matters more now than it ever has. Because if you make good money, if you are building something, if you are disciplined and ambitious, there is a quiet pressure you are probably feeling right now. A sense that you should already own. That renting means you are behind. That stability comes from locking something in. But here is the truth most people never hear explained clearly. For high-income earners and entrepreneurs, the biggest financial mistakes are rarely about spending too much. They are about locking in decisions too early. This video is not about telling you not to buy a house. It is about helping you understand when buying strengthens you and when it quietly limits you. Because a house is not just a financial decision. It is a lifestyle decision. It is a liquidity decision. It is a flexibility decision. And if you get the order wrong, even a good income can start to feel tight. If you have ever looked at your numbers and thought, I am doing well, so why do I feel less free than I expected? This conversation is for you. By the end of this video, you will know exactly how to think about homeownership in a way that protects your cash flow, your optionality, and your future opportunities. No fear. No hype. Just clarity. To understand why buying a home feels like such a default goal, you have to understand where that idea came from. For decades, homeownership was not just a lifestyle choice. It was a financial engine. Wages rose steadily. Housing was cheap relative to income. Interest rates were low or falling. And most careers rewarded loyalty and time. In that environment, buying early worked. A house acted like forced savings. A mortgage replaced rent. And appreciation quietly did the rest. For your parents and grandparents, buying a home was often the smartest financial decision they could make, even if they did not understand the math behind it. The system did the work for them. But here is the mistake we make today. We repeat the advice without asking whether the conditions that made it true still exist. Because advice only works when the environment supports it. When wages grow faster than housing costs, buying early helps. When financing is cheap and stable, leverage works in your favor. When careers are predictable, long-term commitments feel safe. That world created the rule, buy as soon as you can. And for a long time, that rule made people wealthy. But rules do not age well when the system changes. And the system changed. Not suddenly. Quietly. Over time. The reason buying a house feels heavier today is not emotional. It is mathematical. The relationship between income and housing changed. Wages grew slowly. Housing costs grew quickly. And the gap never closed. Decades ago, a home cost a few multiples of annual income. Today, in many markets, it costs many multiples more. That alone changes everything. Because when prices rise faster than income, the mortgage no longer replaces rent. It competes with your future. Monthly payments become larger relative to cash flow. And cash flow is what creates freedom. Then there is interest. Low interest rates did not make houses cheaper. They made higher prices possible. When money was cheap, buyers could borrow more, which pushed prices up. Now that rates are higher, payments stay elevated even when prices pause. So the math hits twice. High prices, high carrying costs. And here is the part people miss. A house feels like wealth because the number is large. But wealth is not a number on paper. Wealth is what your assets allow you to do. If your home does not generate income, it does not support your lifestyle. It supports your balance sheet. And those are not the same thing. This is how people become asset-rich and cash-constrained. They own something valuable, but they feel pressure every month. Not because they made a reckless decision, but because they applied an old rule in a new environment. When people evaluate whether they can afford a house, they usually focus on the obvious numbers. The purchase price, the monthly payment, the interest rate. But the most important costs never appear on a mortgage calculator. They show up later. The first hidden cost is liquidity. When you buy a home, you convert flexible capital into locked equity. That equity looks good on paper, but it cannot be easily accessed without friction, risk, or time. Liquidity is what allows you to move quickly. It lets you invest when opportunities appear. It protects you when income becomes uneven. And it creates psychological safety. When liquidity drops too low, every decision feels heavier. The second hidden cost is flexibility. A mortgage anchors you to a location, a payment, and a lifestyle. That is fine if your future is predictable. But for entrepreneurs and high-income earners, predictability is often the exception, not the rule. Opportunities rarely arrive on a schedule. They require movement. The third cost is mental bandwidth. Large fixed expenses create background pressure. Even when income is high, the obligation is constant. It occupies attention. It narrows decision-making. And over time, it can quietly reduce your willingness to take smart risks. This is why two people with the same income can feel completely different financially. One has margin. The other has obligations. And margin is what creates freedom. A house does not just cost money. It costs options. Up to this point, it might sound like buying early is always a bad idea. It is not. For some people, buying a home early is not only reasonable, it is optimal. The key difference is not income. It is stability. Buying early works best when your life is unlikely to change in meaningful ways for a long time. If you plan to stay in the same location for many years, if your income is predictable and resilient, if your payment is comfortably below what you could handle, even in a down year, and if buying does not drain your liquidity, in those cases, ownership can reduce friction. It can simplify life. It can provide emotional comfort without creating financial pressure. But notice how specific those conditions are. They describe a narrow profile, stable location, stable income, low stress payment, strong cash reserves. When those conditions exist, a house becomes a support system. When they do not, a house becomes a constraint. This is why two people can buy at the same time and have very different outcomes. The difference is not discipline or intelligence. It is alignment. If you are an entrepreneur or a high-income earner, your financial reality is different, even if it does not look that way on paper. Income may be high, but it is often uneven. Some months carry the weight of many others. That changes how commitments should be evaluated. For people who build businesses, income is not just money. It is fuel. Fuel needs flexibility. When too much capital is locked into fixed expenses, growth slows. Not because opportunity disappears, but because risk tolerance quietly shrinks. This is why many high-income earners feel paradoxically constrained. They earn more than most people, yet they feel less free than they expected. It is not because they mismanaged money. It is because they optimized for security before they optimized for leverage. There is a difference between feeling safe and being stable. Safety is emotional. Stability is structural. Liquidity creates stability. Optionality creates resilience. Ownership amplifies what already exists. It does not replace the foundation. This is why rushing into ownership too early can feel heavy for the very people who are capable of building wealth. Not because they cannot afford it, but because the timing is wrong. One of the most damaging ideas in personal finance is that renting means you are losing. That belief creates pressure, and pressure leads to rushed decisions. Renting is not a failure state. It is a tool. When used intentionally, renting preserves flexibility. It keeps capital liquid. It allows you to adapt as your income, opportunities, and priorities evolve. Renting protects you from timing risk. Buying locks you into a specific moment in the market. Renting allows you to wait for alignment. This matters more when markets are uncertain and careers are nonlinear. A disciplined renter who invests the difference can outperform an emotional buyer who stretches too early. The problem is not renting. The problem is renting without intention. When rent is controlled and the difference is deployed productively, renting becomes a strategic advantage. It buys time. It buys leverage. And most importantly, it buys clarity. Renting only becomes expensive when it replaces planning. One of the biggest misconceptions around homeownership is that it is a primary wealth builder. In reality, it is usually a wealth amplifier. Amplifiers only work when there is something to amplify. For most high-income earners and entrepreneurs, wealth is built in a different order. First comes income. Not just salary, but income engines that grow with time and skill. Second comes liquidity. Cash and near-cash assets create resilience. They absorb volatility and allow you to act when opportunities appear. Third comes optionality, the ability to change direction without financial strain. And only then does ownership make sense. Ownership magnifies stability. It does not create it. When people reverse this order, they often end up house-rich and decision-poor. They own something valuable, but they lack margin. The goal is not to avoid ownership. The goal is to enter it from strength. Because when income is solid, liquidity is healthy, and options are wide, ownership feels light, not heavy. Rejecting rushed ownership does not mean rejecting ownership altogether. It means choosing timing and structure deliberately. For many high-income earners, the smartest path is buying later, not never. Waiting allows income to stabilize. It allows cash reserves to grow. And it allows decisions to be made from confidence instead of pressure. Some people choose to separate lifestyle from investment. They rent where flexibility matters and invest where numbers work. Others pursue ownership that produces income alongside shelter. Some wait until the payment represents a small fraction of cash flow, not a stretch. There is no single correct path. There is only alignment. Conservative ownership prioritizes margin. It assumes volatility will happen. It plans for discomfort before it appears. When ownership is entered this way, it enhances life instead of narrowing it. The mistake is not buying. The mistake is rushing. At this point, the question is not whether buying a house is good or bad. The question is whether it fits your current position. Here is a simple way to evaluate that. First, location. If you are not confident you will stay in the same place for many years, flexibility has value. Second, income. Not how much you make in good months, but how resilient your income is across bad ones. Third, payment comfort. If your housing cost requires constant performance to sustain, it adds pressure. Fourth, liquidity. After buying, you should still be able to handle uncertainty without stress. And finally, opportunity cost. Ask what this decision prevents. Every commitment closes doors. The right commitment closes the wrong ones. If buying improves sleep, clarity, and focus, it may be time. If it adds anxiety, rigidity, or pressure, it may be early. A good decision feels supportive, not restrictive. Even when the math says wait, many people still feel the urge to buy. That urge rarely comes from numbers. It comes from comparison. Friends buying homes. Family asking questions. A quiet sense that renting means falling behind. But comparison distorts timing. It turns personal decisions into public benchmarks. And it pushes people to optimize for appearance instead of alignment. A house is an easy symbol. It signals success. Stability. Arrival. But symbols are expensive when they are purchased before they are earned. Most financial pressure is social, not structural. It comes from expectations that were never designed for your situation. Entrepreneurs, especially, are vulnerable to this. Their progress is uneven. Their success is invisible for long stretches. Ownership feels like proof. But proof is not progress. Progress is margin. Progress is optionality. Progress is being able to say no to the wrong opportunities and yes to the right ones. When decisions are driven by identity instead of intention, they tend to cost more than expected.